One measure of the fact that I think Indian democracy is not just in crisis, but there is a deep, deep diminishing of hope at this juncture compared to 5 years ago or perhaps 10 years ago, is the following. The 2019 election is an election with very high stakes. Many would argue this is an election that is central to the survival of democracy, because if some balance of power is not restored in this democracy, democracy will be in peril. But the paradox is, it's a very high-stakes election, but it's also an election with very low expectations, right? What are the low expectations? Will our democracy survive? Will we muddle through the way we have over the last few years? All the big repositories of hope that we had accumulated over the last 10, 15 years. India is at the cusp of a structural transformation, right? India will, in a sense, reach a new stratosphere of growth and inclusion and job creation. I think all of those expectations have been deeply disappointed. And why is that the case? And this is really the one big point I want to make. Because I think there is something happening to our democracy which is mutilating what one might grandiosely call the democratic soul, right? We are becoming a nation of resentful hearts, small minds, and constricted souls. In some senses, democracy should be an occasion for exuberance, lightness, freedom, gaiety, celebration, where one is heading is more important than where one comes from, right? Instead, what is our democracy becoming? A throwback to the past, right? So let's just very quickly look at what are we losing in this democracy, okay? So I'm going to ask you a question. How many in this room think of themselves as nationalists? Put up your hand. Okay? Oh, not bad. Of those of you who put up your hand, how many of you have a certificate that can prove to me that you are a nationalist? Okay? So the first thing that has been taken away from us, right, is our own nationalism, right? Rather than the presumption that all of us are nationalists, this has become something we have to prove, right? Paradoxical, in an age of nationalism, nationalism is the very thing that has begun to divide us and mark us. Okay? So राष्ट्र गया आपके हाथ से, right? जितने भी राष्ट्रवाद की बात करें. Okay, let's move on to something else I'm sure you care about, truth. Right? It's true, all societies are marked by mendacity, propaganda. All regimes like to manipulate that gray zone between truth and falsehood, right? All regimes, in a sense, like to create an environment which is propitious for them. It's true, okay? But have you ever experienced a moment in the last 20 years in Indian democracy where the purpose of the production of knowledge was not truth, but something far more insidious? It was to relieve you of the burden of thinking altogether, okay? It's not about falsehood. It's not about mendacity. It is about a structure of public discourse that relieves you of the burden of thinking. Don't ask questions. You're anti-national. Okay? So, Rashtra gaya, Satya gaya. Now let's come to that cornerstone of our democracy, this exuberant thing we call freedom. Right? Okay? Let's remind ourselves, there are still people in prison, Anand Tentulbe, Sudha Bhardwaj, or at least under the threat of prosecution, for serving marginalized communities in this country. It is true that no government in India across any political party has ever served the cause of civil liberties. You still cannot get the opposition parties to sign on to a new charter of civil liberties that will do away the law of sedition, that will at least reform, if not do away with Article 295 on the Indian Penal Code, right? The act of speaking has become a dangerous act in a democracy, right? So, freedom bhi gaya, Rashtra gaya, Satya gaya, Swatantrata gayi. Okay? Let's move on. The fourth pillar of the democracy, the free press, under whose auspices we are convened. There was a 19th century satirist, Maurice Joly, who actually envisaged a fantasy for what a democratic populist ruler would want of a press. Okay? I'm just reading out a description, and just ask yourself, who does it recognize you of? Who does it remind you of? So this is Napoleon III, right? Who thought he represented the people as a whole. He didn't need any representatives because all the people were in him. He says, my scheme envisions the neutrality of the press, the neutralizing of the press by the press itself. Because journalism wields great power, do you know what government will do? It will become like them. Government itself will become journalism incarnate. Like God Vishnu, my press will have 100 arms, and these arms will stretch out to every shade of opinion. Those who think they speak their own language will also be speaking my language. Those who think they are marching under the banner of their own ideas will also be marching under mine. I will be able to say I direct opinion at will on all questions of external and internal policy. I awaken the people's mind or lull them to sleep. So, press ki swatantra gayi. Let's come to the final thing, religion, right? Okay. This canard, modern India, secular India, has marginalized Indian traditions. I think it has marginalized only those people who did not have confidence in Indian traditions. But, more seriously, we are at the cusp of a fundamental restructuring and transformation of the idea of religion in modern India in three respects, right? First of all, the idea of the mobilization of religion in the service of political power, where our most visible religious faces always begin by saluting the powers that be, right? That's the only mortal God that left. Second, the heresy and hubris of thinking that it is our job to protect our gods, not the God's job to protect us, right? And third, the idea that all religion needs to be co-opted into a single homogeneous power structure. Religion, the very thing that behooves us to transcend our identity, right, is being reduced to the identity that marks you, for which you will be targeted. Okay? So dharam bhi gaya, swatantrata gayi, rashtra gaya, satya gaya, dharam gaya, ajadi gayi, right? Sabhyata, right? What is civility? Societies are always uncivil in some respects, but the norms of civility are set by those who are in the highest positions of power. That's, in fact, their only job, right? Their only job is to signal what can be said or what cannot be said, what is right or what is wrong. Right? But when those in highest positions of authority empower those who would threaten, intimidate, right? Those who would declare most of the people in this room anti-national, right? What is going to be left of civility? I can go on and on. So dharm gaya, rashtra gaya, sanstha gayi, sabhyata gayi. What is actually going to be left? Right? And I think if you want to draw up the scorecard of the last 5 years, I think the most important fact to focus on is that the last 5 years have been a mutilation of the Indian soul. Right? They stand for everything that is un-Indian. Right? They stand against every promise that this democracy gave to each one of its citizens. And so the challenge for us going to be now, and that's why I began by saying this is a low expectation elections, that no matter what the election result, right, unless there is a massive repudiation of the public culture that we have created in the last 5 years, in which many of us have been complicit in ways perhaps that we don't recognize, unless there is a massive repudiation of this public culture, you will not be able to recover either the nation or your freedom, or your truth, or your religion. That's what is going to be at stake in 2019. Thank you.